Howdy, partner. Hey guys, welcome to Elevated Systems. I'm your host CJ, and this is the Cowboy, one of several ATX enclosures in the Model 8 lineup from the relatively new company Geometric Future. I don't know too much about Geometric Future other than they're a Chinese company that started up in 2020 and predominantly have been available in the Asian and European market, but are now available in the US, and their PC cases are pretty unique. They're what I'd call boutique cases with a definite focus on form, but without a huge sacrifice to function. So today we're going to check out the Model 8 Cowboy, review the specs and features, discuss my build notes, and go over the pros and cons of the case. The Model 8 Cowboy is a mid-tower ATX case measuring 500mm deep by 230mm wide by 500mm tall. The exterior of the case features a solid brushed aluminum front panel, a mesh steel top panel, smoke tempered glass side panels both left and right, which are trimmed in SSA grade full grain cattle hide. This premium leather also trims the front I/O panel. Removing the side panel and sliding off the top panel reveals the vertically inverted layout with all the I/O and PCIe expansion on the top of the case. This layout means you rotate the motherboard at 90 degrees clockwise from the normal. The case can accommodate motherboards from mini ITX all the way through the 12 by 13 inch SSI EEB boards, CPU coolers up to 170mm, graphics cards up to 400mm. There's a front position compartment that holds power supplies up to 220mm. For cooling, the case employs a bottom-out design, but doesn't come with any pre-installed fans. However, you can fit 3 120 or 140mm fans on the bottom and up to 3 120 or 140mm fans on the rear of the case. Additionally, there's a spot for a single 120 on the top. For radiator or AIOs, the bottom fits up to a 360mm radiator, while the back can fit up to a 480mm rad or AIO. And an AIO can be positioned with either the tubes down, as long as the tubes don't impact the graphics card, or you can position it tubes up and route the tubes and block across the top of the case and back through the slot adjacent to the fan. Behind the motherboard tray, there are 4 included brackets that can hold either 2.5-inch SSDs or 3.5-inch hard drives, with mounting locations for 2 additional brackets, which can be purchased separately. There's about 29mm of clearance for cable management, as well as multiple tie-down points for the many Velcro cable ties that come with the case. On the top of the case, under the removable mesh panel, is where you'll find all the I/O. There are 7 standard PCIe expansion slots, as well as 3 slots to side mount a graphics card. On the back of the case is the open grate for exhaust and 2 openings for your cables to pass through to the top I/O, so you can pass your power and peripheral cables right into the top of the case or into the bottom and up through the rear into the top. On the bottom of the case is the one plastic framed magnetically attached dust filter. Finally, the front I/O consists of the power button, power and drive indicator LEDs, 2 USB 2 ports, microphone and headphone jacks, 2 5GB Type A ports, a reset switch, and a 10GB Type C port. Now, my standard case testing setup is a micro ATX board, which just looks ridiculous in here. Even the full ATX board I grabbed looks small in here, but overall, the build went fine. Everything fit and there was more than enough room to work in the case, but it wasn't perfect. Probably the biggest issue I had was with the routing for the 8-pin EPS or CPU power cable, or lack of routing. There's a large opening for the cable, but it's positioned directly behind the ATX board VRM, and even with the small VRM heatsink on this older B450 board, the EPS cable can barely fit. Luckily, my cable was a 4+4 pin, so I was able to split it to fit it through, but even now the cable is lying against the heatsink, and heating up a power cable over and over isn't ideal. The bigger problem is boards with larger heatsinks can completely block that opening. Like my Zenith Extreme board, there's no way I could fit that cable if I used a board like that, even if I passed it through before installing the motherboard. And there's no other way to get it there. Nothing from the top. You would have to come up from the bottom and then go over the whole top of the board. Another issue I saw was in mounting an AIO in the rear. The case uses mounting rails for the rear fans or AIOs that you can remove first, then you screw the AIO or fans to the rails, and then the rails screw back to the case. The problem is the only way to reinstall the rails with an AIO or fans attached is through the top, and it barely fits. In fact, on one of the 3 fans I used screws that weren't flush, and it was enough to keep the AIO from fitting. That AIO with the fans is 54 millimeters thick. Anything thicker than that isn't going to fit. Now, you can install the fans after you install the radiator, unless you go with a 480 millimeter AIO radiator, in which case you may not be able to mount that top fan easily. The other problem with the rails is once you get the fans or AIO installed, there's no easy way to adjust them up and down if you need to. I don't actually see a need for the rails at all. They could have just easily incorporated the mounting into the rear of the case, just like they did in the bottom. Of course, this wasn't a huge concern for the configuration I went with. Like I mentioned, the case doesn't come with any fans, but Geometric Future did send along 2 triple packs of their Squama 2505B 120 millimeter fans. So that's what I used for the build, and I went with 3 intake fans on the bottom, 2 rear, and the single top exhaust. This is the config I'm using for thermal testing, which we'll get to in a bit. However, I did have the same problem with these fans as the Inwind Mercury fans I used in my last build, which is they're daisy chainable, but the connection is just a centimeter or 2 from the fan frame, so you end up with a whole lot of cable inside of the case, or at a minimum, the connectors are harder to hide inside a case as opposed to stuff behind with the rest of the cables. First, let's discuss build quality, which is excellent overall. Stripping away all the outer panels, the inner frame is constructed from pretty thick steel and is extremely solid, with almost no chassis flex. The TG panels are 4 millimeters thick, which is heftier than your typical TG panel, and the front panel is a solid sheet of 2 millimeter brushed aluminum, and it easily pops right off, which there really isn't a need for it to come off, but it's a nice feature. I'll talk more about that in a bit. The feet are solid plastic and wrap almost completely around the case, which does give the case a nice sturdy base, but with its bottom out airflow, this doesn't leave much room for air intake. Again, more to come when we get into thermals. The top compartment is very nice, lots of space for cables and even cooling tube routing and plenty of vertical space. The case comes with a power cable extension, but not a 90-degree cable because it's not necessary like in a lot of inverted cases. None of your connections will need adapters to fit. The mesh top cover is nice, but once the case is all together, there's no easy way to remove the panel. There's just nothing to grab onto. You need to remove at least one of the side panels so you can grab the lip of the cover to slide it off. Something simple like a pull tab on the back would be nice for quickly getting to all the I/O under there. Okay, let's look at thermal performance, and as a baseline, the system on an open air test bench during a 20-minute AIDA64 stress test on the CPU and GPU simultaneously had a peak CPU temp of 60 degrees Celsius above ambient, 49°C on the GPU, and 13°C on the motherboard VRM. With the PC in a standard configuration, the CPU maxed out at 67°C, GPU 54°C, and motherboard 18°C. When I side mounted the GPU, the temps actually fell by a degree or 2. However, the caveat here is my GPU is only a double slot, so there's an entire slot of clearance between the glass side panel. And a triple slot card would be pretty choked off here against the glass. Finally, I mentioned the bottom of this case was pretty choked off, so I lifted the case about an inch. FYI, 9-volt batteries are about an inch wide, and this time the GPU still side mounted. Temps fell significantly with CPU maxing out at just 59 degrees above ambient, the GPU at 50°C, and the motherboard was 12 degrees above ambient. So the feet definitely restrict potential airflow. The flow is actually further restricted by the frame of the filter. This can become significant as you put higher end, hotter hardware in here. So, final thoughts on the Geometric Future Model 8 Cowboy. I'll start with function. Like I said, this is an overall well-built case. Great high-end materials, Great build quality with just a few points of improvement I already mentioned, specifically the EPS pass-through, the rear mounting rails, and the feet. As far as form, I like the overall design. I like the sharp, clean edges, the dual TG panels. Some may not like that. It makes cable management more pressing, but I like it. It gives the case a nice symmetry, and it allows for very creative custom cabling, and in this case, even the option for custom cooling runs. The leather trim is a very unique feature. It gives the case personality, and because it's authentic cattle hide, it will age and darken over time. Probably not the case for vegans though. With that said, I actually think they may have missed the mark overall. Like I said, the Model 8 comes in several variations. One is the Dharma, which has the same brushed aluminum panel and matching aluminum trim in place of the leather on the Cowboy. To me, the cold hard tone of the aluminum clashes with the warm soft leather. I think the perfect complement to cattle hide and a cowboy theme would have been wood. A nice warm, maybe natural cherry front panel, even matching wood or wood veneered feet. That would have made this case perfect. On the positive side, the front panel does just pop off even though there's no real need for it to, so it does allow for easy customization or even replacement. But that's just subjective. Objectively, is this case worth the price? Well, that depends on the price as it changes every time I check. The MSRP I think is around $199 US, which is what it's listed on at Amazon. But it was at about $169 on Newegg, but at the time I'm filming, it's on sale for $150. Now, any of those prices is fair for this case. Intrinsically, it's probably worth the $200 MSRP. Higher gauge steel, all the tempered glass, aluminum, high grade leather. With the exception of that last one, there are other cases out there with this level of materials and build quality. The PCO11 Dynamic, the Fractal Torrent, they come to mind, and those are equivalently priced. But because of the issues, especially the likelihood you may not be able to route your CPU power and the choked off primary intake, I'd say that $200 price point is probably a bit high. However, it's a good value at $169, especially considering you're most likely building a $1,500 to $2,000 or higher system in a case in this class, and at $150, it's a great deal. But what do y'all think of the Geometric Future Model 8 Cowboy? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, be sure to hit that like and maybe consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.